This is far from the first time we've made a video about the Chernobyl exclusion zone. You've already heard the story of the Policia Hotel, seen how the self-settlers live, or how nature has hidden entire villages in its thickets. It might seem like life here has come to a halt, but that's not the case. Hundreds of people still work at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant. And today, I'm going right into its heart. You'll see the brain of the nuclear plant, the control room of the fourth reactor. This is exactly where the button was pressed that accelerated the catastrophe. We'll show you the famous sarcophagus, as well as the spot where a Russian Shahed drone recently struck, making the nuclear facility dangerous once again. Don't forget to subscribe to Pressing, like this video, and I hope you enjoy watching. To get into the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, you have to get a lot of permits and go through tons of checks. And just when it seems like you're almost inside, that's actually when it all really begins.
A urine sample is a test for the content of cesium-137 in your body. We will do this before we go on our route and after. That is, may everything be well with you.
Doesn't that hurt?
You have to sit for about 5 minutes straight.
Well, we can do that. $80. 180.
Вагу зріст свою знаєте?
Приблизно на 174 і вага десь 65. А ні, які 65? 70.
Якщо не знаєте, можна
Давайте.
точно, давайте, вставайте сюди. Кілограм где-то 79 у вас.
79? А ти сказав 65?
One of us was a little upset about our weight, but there's no cesium in our bodies. Well, at least that's something to be thankful for. We're already at the station's doorstep. Up next are the final outfit changes.
We're entering the locker room. Here, they gave us slippers. Now, we're gonna completely change our clothes, because there are some special rules here. I think that's enough. We've never started a shoot like this before. They made us strip down. Well, I still look okay for the shot, but the cameraman in his underwear, that's hilarious. What I like about you guys is they give you long johns, pants, jackets, sweaters, and even shoes. Basically, oh, and gloves too. Honestly, it's awesome. This is what we look like. We're already at the final stage. They gave us these cumulative dosimeters. If we suddenly get a higher dose than allowed, we'll leave right away. But we hope that won't happen.
This is the main artery that connects the entire nuclear power plant. A concrete tunnel over 600 meters long. You can reach every unit through it. People call it the Golden Corridor. They couldn't completely decontaminate the concrete walls from radiation, so they covered them with somewhat flashy aluminum panels. It feels like the corridor of some old hotel that just goes on forever.
How safe is it here right now? Is the radiation level high here?
Well, it's absolutely safe here. The walls are cleaned regularly, and so is the floor. Every day, dosimetrists walk around here, checking to make sure everything is safe. People work here every day. They walk through this corridor to their workplaces every single day.
The Golden Corridor is just massive. Of course, it's not actually made of gold, that's obvious, but it really does look pretty cool and futuristic. And honestly, there are a lot of different doors here. I asked the staff, for example, and they've never been behind these doors, even though they've worked here for a really long time. This is the SCC Scala. Basically, this is where the supercomputers of that era were located. They monitored how the reactors were operating. They processed a ton of different data. There's a huge room in there filled with all these computing machines, and honestly, all of that could now fit into your regular smartphone.
Back then, Scala took up an entire room. It collected data from thousands of different reactor sensors. The system could see everything, but it couldn't influence the processes. There was no monitor that instantly displayed all the important data. Scala gathered the information, and then a special teletype RTA-80 telegraph printed it out. Today, Scala would just be a small app on your phone, but back then it was about 90 cabinets packed with electronics, tens of kilometers of cables, and instead of hard drives, they used huge reel-to-reel tape recorders. And the weight of this app wasn't a few megabytes, but 3,000 kilograms. Nuclear power plants are a topic you could study for years and still not fully understand. Let me explain it to you in simple terms, how everything works. Imagine that a nuclear reactor is just like an ordinary kettle. The water is heated up to 320 degrees, but it doesn't boil because it's under an incredible pressure of 160 atmospheres. That's like being underwater at a depth of 1.5 kilometers.
An accident has occurred at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant.
Hello, is this Chernobyl NTP Pierre?
Yes.
What's burning over there?
There was an accident, but it's probably not appropriate to disclose its scale.
There are actually groups of people who think that after 1986, the plant stopped operating. But it actually kept running until 2000.
Is it still running now?
Yes. Well, explain to those people why it kept generating electricity, why it wasn't shut down.
There was no reason to shut it down. Actually, after the investigation into what happened in 1986, a certain plan of measures was developed to modify and modernize the reactor units in order to improve their safety. And there was no reason to shut down the RBMK reactor system, considering their high efficiency and large capacity. It would have been optimal to keep using the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and continue generating electricity. Because even with an accident at the facility, when the first, second, and third power units were operating, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was one of the most powerful energy sources in Europe.
And what about security?
Well, the security was at an appropriate level. I still don't understand why the decision was made to close it for good. Probably, well, in my opinion, these power units, considering the repairs, upgrades, and modifications that were done, could have kept working and continued to benefit the country and the economy, because they really produced a large amount of electricity, something that's especially needed now, for example. It's incorrect to say that the plant isn't operating. The plant is still running, it just isn't generating electricity. Our main problem is that we have an emergency facility, like the shelter object, the fourth power unit.
And on the day of the accident, everything was locked up tight. First of all, very few people understood the real consequences, and second, there was the state policy of the USSR. Disasters and failures had to be kept secret because Soviet people only had successes and victories. Two parallel tasks were being solved: to eliminate the accident and to cover it up. Just your personal opinion. I've asked a lot of experts this too. Would Chernobyl have happened sooner or later anyway? Because if you look at the history, there were already emergency situations in '82 and '84. The KGB wrote some reports saying there were cracks in the first two reactors, that there were shortcomings.
I would point out several reasons because there isn't just one single cause. Chernobyl is a chain of events that actually starts with ideology. If academician Alexandrov claims that the RBMK is so safe you could put it on Red Square, you tend to believe him. Well, an academician said it, right? I mean, he's no fool. He's a smart guy. And that phrase, that ideology, was picked up by the Central Committee of the Communist Party and all the ideological structures of that time. Naturally, for students studying nuclear power plants, they're taught that a Soviet reactor can't explode. It's the safest reactor in the world. Sure, there might be some incidents, but it simply can't explode. This, I believe, is the first mistake, an ideological one. The second is the implementation of the graphite-moderated channel reactor project itself. The idea itself, as paradoxical as it may sound to many, is actually a good one. It can operate practically, not forever, but for a very long time. You don't have to shut it down for refueling like you do at a VVER. On-the-fly refuel. That's awesome. For example, you can produce irradiated silicon in it, which is used in electronics, and you can't make it anywhere else. By the way, they actually did that with the RBMK. There was a separate technological channel where they produced irradiated silicon. So under neutron irradiation, its crystal lattice structure would change, and somehow its properties would improve. Plus the production and extraction of various isotopes for medicine. So there are a lot of positive qualities. And the next step for the RBMK would have been nuclear superheating of steam. So the steam that was produced back then would be passed through the core a second time, making it drier, and the temperature and efficiency of the reactor and fuel were higher. The implementation was spot on. For example, how was the VVR implemented? First 320, then 440, then only 1,000.
Is everything going okay?
Yes. That is, they started with low-power reactors. They examined, researched, implemented, improved, and fixed some of the flaws. What did they do with the RBMK?
Right off the bat.
They went straight to 1,000. And then the problems started to show up, specifically design flaws, project flaws. They tried to improve it gradually, but the Soviet Union's ideological, bureaucratic machine was very slow to change. In the end, it led to Chernobyl. Of course, the staff also made some mistakes, but if it hadn't been for the earlier mistakes, nothing would have happened.
After the Chernobyl accident, the number of workers didn't decrease much because liquidators were added. According to open sources, more than 9,000 employees serviced the plant up until 1986. After the disaster, the number of personnel didn't drop immediately. At first, there were 8,000 to 9,000 people. Then as the power units were shut down, the number of workers decreased, although even now there are still several thousand. As for electricity production, the last to go offline was the third power unit, which was shut down only in the year 2000.
This is the brain of the station, the block control panel, the last one that was shut down at the Chernobyl plant, the third one. I think you've seen this video. If not, let us remind you how, on December 15th, 2000, Kuchma gave the order to shut down the plant. And there's a story that, in reality, the plant had supposedly not been operating for almost 2 weeks already, and all of this was just done for the TV cameras.
I hereby officially issue the order for the immediate commencement of the technical work on the comprehensive and final decommissioning process of the third unit of the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant.
Understood. Start now. Attention to the bridge. Proceeding to shut down the reactor using the emergency protection key 5. A P5 mode's engaged. All rods are going into the unit. The reactor has been shut down with key Z5.
Mr. President of Ukraine, the reactor of power unit number 3 has been completely shut down. No comments.
Блок не був на потужності, да. Wasn't operating at full power, but certain processes in the reactor are always ongoing, even when it's in what's called a shutdown state, as they say. That means the operators who control the reactor are constantly performing certain operations to keep the reactor in its current state. Even if it's shut down, certain control operations still need to be performed. Unfortunately, at that time, the first and second units had already been out of operation for several years. There were some issues with operation and capability. We even had a fire in the turbine hall of the second power unit. That was a long time ago, in '92, if I remember correctly.
Was Unit 3 still operational or in emergency mode and dangerous?
No, it wasn't in an emergency state, and neither the first nor the second were either. There were some issues with the first one, but now this information is already publicly available. Back in 1982, there was an accident at the first reactor. One of the technological channels ruptured there, and even now, despite the fact that the fuel has already been removed from the active zone, there are still remnants of the fuel composition in the graphite blocks themselves. The first such accident happened back in the early '80s. A similar accident occurred at the Leningrad Nuclear Power Plant at the end of the '70s, and the first unit actually operated for quite a long time. It was completely shut down sometime in the early '90s. Mainly the second and third units were operating. At first, there was scheduled preventative maintenance, then a decision was made to suspend its operation. Power was supplied only from the third unit.
In reality, accidents at nuclear facilities during the Soviet era were not uncommon. 30 years before Chernobyl, there was an incident at Chelyabinsk 40. This is a closed city where the Mayak plant was located. The plant's task was anything but ordinary, producing plutonium for nuclear bombs. The USSR was in a huge rush because they needed to catch up with the United States, and they absolutely didn't care about the scientists' health, the environment, or the price people would have to pay for making this idea a reality. So, what happened at Chelyabinsk 40? Besides dumping nuclear waste into the river, there was also a massive explosion. Just to give you an idea of how powerful it was, a concrete slab weighing 160 tons was thrown 25 meters away. But don't panic, the plant was back up and running the very next day, even though a radioactive cloud had covered its grounds and the nearby towns. Around 500,000 people were exposed to radiation. But who was really counting those people? And if you take a look at the map showing where nuclear plant accidents happened in the USSR, the conclusion's pretty obvious. Sooner or later, a disaster like Chernobyl was bound to happen anyway, especially since the Chernobyl nuclear power plant itself was hardly a model of safety. There are KGB documents that were made public not so long ago by the Security Service of Ukraine, and they mention accidents at the plant, including a radioactive release in 1982 at the first reactor unit. In 1984, there were emergency situations at the third and fourth reactor units, and overall, there were plenty of other minor breakdowns and deficiencies.
Tell us about the fire on the second one. I read that almost the entire machine hall burned down there. Why did it happen, and what were the consequences?
There was a hydrogen leak from the turbine, and when its concentration reached an explosive level, there was an explosion and a fire. Saying the whole machine hall burned down is a bit of an exaggeration, but the roof, the covering, burned pretty badly.
Is it because, historically, there were problems with almost every reactor?
In principle, there's really nothing complicated about it. Overall, the reactor project itself was rushed. In my personal opinion, there were some shortcomings on the technical side. And considering what was happening during Soviet times, for example, as I think everyone understands, there was always a set deadline by which a certain job had to be completed. I think the country's leadership set specific deadlines for the reactor developers. Neglecting some safety requirements, they simply sped up the development timeline. And it had to be put into operation to meet a certain planned economy. And some mistakes were made. And, you know, the saddest thing is that these mistakes could have been avoided This situation that happened at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant could possibly have been avoided, considering the knowledge that was gained after the accident at the Leningrad nuclear power plant reactor. By that time, basically, there was already an understanding that there were some problems with this reactor. The reactor is very unstable, constantly. It tends to run away on its own. The operators who managed the reactor would lose weight during a single shift because there was never a time when they could just relax for a while. They constantly had to perform certain operations to maintain the stability of the reactor core and the reactor as a whole. Considering what was said in the series Chernobyl, some of it was basically true, but it's more of a dramatic film based on real events. But the thing is, there was some information there that was accurate. To cut costs on the reactor's construction, they used certain elements that, honestly, shouldn't have been used at all.
I think you heard the music playing in the background, which is pretty much everywhere here. It's this old Soviet radio that's in every hallway, at every turn, even on the block control panel. It's not just for entertainment. If there's an air raid alert or some important information, this is the notification system. So, this is how we're moving forward. They gave us special gloves and another personal dosimeter. This shows the level of accumulated radiation. If it goes above 0.1 millisieverts, we'll have to leave. Well, overall, everything looks really nice here. They also warned us not to touch the walls any further, because you could get contaminated and carry some radioactive residue with you. Don't take off your respirator in certain areas. And there are also these cool white mats that you absolutely have to step on so you don't end up with any radioactive dust or dangerous residue on the shoes. If something falls on the floor, you're not allowed to pick it up and put it in your pocket either. The further we go, the less golden the corridor becomes. You understand where we're headed. This is that same golden corridor. One version is that they removed this aluminum because it was extremely dirty. They just left the walls as they are, and you can see for yourself what's left of the paint.
These kinds of pallets, basically, we have them everywhere along our road. This is at the exit. You'll also pass by them when leaving the facility. These are special radiation monitoring stands. They indicate if there's any surface contamination, and if so, they signal that some decontamination needs to be done. Back in 2005, when I first came here, these walls didn't exist at all. These ones right here. Behind them was the control panel for the 4th unit. Later, it was decided to separate it off. Let's go. We've just arrived. And right when we came in here, this is where the control room was.
The Chernobyl nuclear power plant probably wouldn't have become world famous if it weren't for that horrific nighttime experiment on April 26, 1986. We're heading to the place where it all happened. I've seen the control room of reactor number 4 many times in movies and on YouTube. But when you actually walk in here yourself, the feeling is just so strange. It's dark, unusually quiet, and for some reason, you're not scared. You just can't believe that you're really seeing all of this in person.
Just look at where we are. Block control room number 4. Honestly, I never thought I'd ever end up here. If you think you've had a bad day at work, just remember all the people here. Here, as you can see, there are hardly any left. Buttons. There are a few theories about what happens in them. Maybe someone took them as souvenirs, but the more realistic version, which I believe, is that there just wasn't enough equipment of various kinds. And they could have just taken parts from here for other control panel units, because there really was a shortage of this kind of equipment. Remember how much space there was at the other control panel block? Here, there's this huge concrete wall, and there's a lot less space.
And what were your emotions when you first came in here?
I was scared. The very first time, I didn't expect to see this. Of course, as a resident of Slavutic, whose parents and whole family worked at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, I had heard about this. About the accident, of course. And when I first got in here, like I said, there weren't these walls separating things. And when we came in from the hallway into this big room, I immediately saw the control panel and got a little scared. I didn't think everything would be so openly accessible at that time. But it was really interesting.
Is there anything left of that famous button or what?
No, nothing. In theory, it should have been somewhere around here, in this area. But I don't see anything.
In your opinion, the accident would have happened sooner or later anyway. Could it have been avoided?
I'll tell you this, if basically those mistakes hadn't been made, I'm not going to say whether they were intentional or unintentional by the staff who were conducting those tests, then the accident simply wouldn't have happened. As I said earlier, the reactor did have certain flaws, yes, but it had to be brought to the point where it would explode. And that's exactly what happened. The same situation, the experiment, the test, was supposed to be conducted during the day. It was postponed to the night because an order came from above not to stop the operation of the power unit, since it needed to stay at full capacity and keep generating electricity. And apparently, the order came from Kiev, or maybe from Moscow. I don't know. That was during Soviet times, you know. And it was precisely because of this that the procedure itself was violated, the procedure for preparing the reactor for testing. Well, and then, according to the experiment's conditions, if I'm not mistaken, they were supposed to simulate a shutdown by cutting off the power supply at a load of 700 megawatts. They started conducting the experiment when the power was 200 megawatts. The essence of the experiment, basically, it was more about the electrical part of the unit, not the reactor at all. Due to the inertia of the turbine runout at a power of 700 megawatts, this runout was still enough to generate a certain amount of electricity, which would power these pumps until the backup diesel generators started up and supplied this voltage. But 200 megawatts, well, according to the test conditions, that was, well, too low of a power level. We know that Dyatlov himself was directly involved at that time. Under his supervision, the operations for this test were carried out. How he behaved, what commands he gave, we don't know that.
How contaminated is this particular spot right now?
Considering that we have direct reading dosimeters, as for gamma radiation, we don't even have one microsievert yet. But as for surface contamination, yes, if you look at alpha-beta contamination, there is some here. I wouldn't say it's very high. The thing is, back in the day, decontamination was carried out here every single day. They treated the surfaces with special chemical solutions, and with their help, the surface contamination was removed. Oh, we have one microsievert here.
This is our protective confinement, and it's extremely tall. It's taller than the Statue of Liberty, and even with our camera, it's incredibly hard to capture it. Did you hear the news that a Shahed hit here? They were putting out the fire for about a month, because the material is special, a kind of membrane that doesn't burn, but smolders for a very long time. And these are the remains after the Shahed strike.
It completely pierced the outer shell of the arch and hit this garage, the northern maintenance garage. There, it exploded, damaging the equipment. Some of its remains could be seen there. You could find what survived right inside. Yeah. And because of this, what happened? Fire started, and it was this thing that caught fire. This is the insulation membrane. It's only about 1.5 millimeters thick, and it covers the entire shell of the arch, the whole arch. It was this membrane that provided the sealant. And what happened then? This membrane started to smolder because the arch was inspected from the outside with a thermal imager using a drone. And wherever they saw heat spreading, the firefighter climbers would go up there and cut through the outer shell of the arch. As soon as they opened it up, air would get in, ignition would occur, and then a large amount of water was pumped in through hoses to put it out. We still don't know the full extent of the damage to this membrane. This can only be determined after the cladding is either opened up or, well, after some kind of investigative work is carried out by other means. So, as I mentioned, right now proposals for conducting investigative work are being considered in order to assess the extent of the damage. And only then will we be able to draw certain conclusions about what we can actually do and what measures we can take to restore the functionality of this facility. I remember that we arrived on February 17th. The incident happened on the 14th, and on the 17th we came for our shift. And basically, we were working, all the while knowing there was a fire right above our heads. Let me tell you, it wasn't a very pleasant feeling. And right here at this table, there was a girl sitting next to me. She was keeping track of the radiation dose exposure for the state emergency service personnel. And she was showing me those numbers. Not as much as it used to be, back when the stabilization work was being done, but the stabilization work was also being done by the plant personnel, and we have different dose limits. Ours are higher than those for the state emergency service personnel. And for the state emergency service, yeah, for example, in just an hour and a half, one of the climbers received 3.5 millisieverts. Well, I don't know, that number probably doesn't mean much to you. For example, our exposure control level is 14 millisieverts, while for firefighters it's 6. And some of the firefighters received 3.5 millisieverts in just an hour and a half, which is more than a half-year dose.
If the control panel in the block was strange but calm, here the scale is so massive that it honestly makes you uneasy. In fact, you're standing in front of one of the most dangerous sites in the world. Just a minute's walk and you're already right next to it.
You understand perfectly well yourself that this is what people commonly call the sarcophagus, that concrete structure where the radioactive waste was buried after the explosion. I've seen at least one video, and we're gonna try to find the person who went inside because it's just unbelievably dangerous in there.
Of course, we found this person. You already saw Alexander Kupny at the beginning of the video. And he really is a living legend, because there probably isn't anyone else in the world who has entered the shelter facility more often than he has.
In one interview, you mentioned that you actually worked just a wall away from the 4th reactor, and you always really wanted to take a look in there.
That's right.
So how did you even get the idea to go into the sarcophagus? Because when people see it in photos, they think that if you just go to Pripyat, you're already dead. Even now, we often get comments like, "Oh my God, that's so scary. You drove there in a car. You should throw the car away."
You see, most people think that way because, or for the most part, in Ukraine, even now, and not just in Ukraine, but let's talk about Ukraine. One of the main lessons of Chernobyl still hasn't been learned or put into practice. Our population is traditionally completely ignorant when it comes to radiation, absolutely clueless. People remember a bit from physics class, but now with online learning, all that knowledge is basically gone. And that's it. So for them, it's like, oh, the zone, radiation, that's it. It's the end. Everyone died there. Oh, Zaporizhia, it's Chernobyl #2. That's it. Half of Europe will be gone. It's all because of this traditional ignorance. And if we're talking about the 4th unit, when I got hired in May of 1988, on May 5th, 1988, my first day of work at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant at the 3rd unit, I originally, as a dosimetrist, really wanted to get in there, so to speak, just behind that wall. From our radiation safety control panel to the guard who was stationed there, it was literally just 100 or 150 meters. Because for dosimetry, the shelter object is a real gold mine, you could say. All types of radiation are present there except for neutron radiation. Neutron radiation is only found in an operating reactor. You know, it's scary for those who don't understand what radiation is. For people who know how to work with it, for most of them, it's actually fascinating. I mean, in one place you can measure hard beta, soft beta, hard gamma radiation, alpha radiation. You can find it all in one spot. Man, it's actually really cool. That's why I was so eager to go there. And in the end, my dream at the time basically came true. And in the fall of '88, I finally made it there. And right away, my friend and I went to the entrance of the central hall. Wow, it was all there.
By the way, Alexander Kupny is truly a legend of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. We're gonna make a separate big video and interview with him. He'll be telling us what he saw inside the sarcophagus, because he's probably been there more often than anyone else on planet Earth. If you're interested, be sure to let us know in the comments.
Sooner or later, something will have to be done with this structure, because there are certain operational time limits. Plus, after a Shahed drone hit the confinement, its protective functions were also compromised. And what to do about all this next, no one really knows yet. It might even require some completely new technologies that haven't been invented yet.
What is the shelter object? It's the remains of the 4th reactor unit, what's left after the explosion. Some structures were added to somehow restore the isolation of what's inside. At that time, in 1986, it was the best solution possible. To use the remains of the destroyed building, which were more or less stable, and to add certain additional elements in order to isolate what was inside the shelter object from the surrounding environment.
Скільки він ще може простояти, скільки він ще може бути так умовно безпечним. Ну, його все одно там, з ним далі треба буде щось робити.
From the very first moment it existed, it was never truly safe. At this stage, everything is stable, everything is fine. If there isn't, let's put it this way, if there isn't any external impact on this old sarcophagus, then basically at this stage, there's nothing to be afraid of. But considering that there's a war in our country right now, we can't rule anything out. No one could have ever imagined, in principle, that the aggressor state would go so far as to attack a nuclear hazardous facility. And yet, that happened in February. What's going to happen next? All we can do is hope that this situation doesn't happen again, and that it doesn't get any worse. But you understand yourself. What can you really expect from Russia?
No one knows what to expect from a sick country, a neighbor, an aggressor. But I know exactly what to expect from you. If you like the video, don't forget to give it a like. Leave us a few nice comments.